Okay, you hear in the background, if you can hear a plane, we've been hearing planes all day. The oldest hatred in the world is as disgusting as the oldest profession in the world. Anti-Semitism is a bad excuse. They asked Freud, who was obviously a bright man, even though not many of his theories may not be effective as therapy, but in terms I read a lot of his work, he's very bright. So they asked him for what was the psychological profile of an anti-Semite, and he said miserable bastards. And I used to think that that's a joke, but it's the truth. You see, in life there are really only three possibilities. Either you're happy or you're unhappy. Now if you're unhappy, there are two possibilities. Either you're unhappy with yourself, which is kind of what depression is. It's like a self-shame, and that causes us the ego turns against the self. You see, there are only really two forces in this world. There's the force of love, and there's the force of hate. Love wants what's good for oneself and what's good for others. And hate actually wants what's bad for oneself. But there is a caveat. And the caveat is this: sometimes people are miserable not because of self-shame, but they're miserable because other people shame them. They're suffering not from anything that they did wrong, but they're suffering from being bullied. And in fact, studies show that everybody's been bullied. I've been bullied. So why did the bully pick on me? It's very simple. Because I was filled with love. I loved myself and I loved others. And the bully was filled with hate. He hated himself and he hated others. Now, it's important to notice that unlike many perhaps philosophies or radical ideologies that paint things in a black and white picture, good and bad, it's not like that. Everybody has some good and some bad. It's just a question of degrees. There's a famous book of Jewish mysticism called the Tanya, where he basically says, the completely righteous person has transformed himself, completely into good. But the average person is always going to struggle. There's always some bad in us. We're likely to get angry, but we overcome it. And that's what religion is really about. A healthy religion, that is a Judeo-Christian religion. It's about learning what are good emotions and good behaviors and trying to overcome our negative instincts for the positive. But the problem is that when a person's been shamed and we create a narcissistic identity, which really is a fancy word of saying we create an illusional identity. It's as if we created an avatar and we're presenting to this world the self, which literally isn't real. It is this kind of very ego-based, I like to call it, it's like a knight in shining armor. So you might think that knight in his shining armor is so strong, but actually he's so afraid, because if he didn't have fear, he wouldn't need an armor. We put on an armor because we're protecting our sensitive self and heart from getting hurt again, from getting abused again, from getting shamed again. And we're presenting to the world a front that says, I am perfect. And then we begin to believe our own front. We put on a mask. It's like this guy that puts on the armor to protect himself, but then he begins to think that he is a knight. He is a knight in shining armor. He is a hero. And if anybody says he isn't, then he goes ballistic, because you've created your pride around this false, basically illusion, this avatar which you have created. And again, you can't blame people, because this is a reaction to circumstances. And to make a long story short, the result of, God forbid, when someone shames someone and then the person believes it, is that not only do they have this internal kind of depression, but they have what I call repression. They are now afraid of people, because anybody can shame you, and if your experience is someone shamed you, maybe somebody else will shame you. So you begin to live in a world, which a lot of Nobel Prizes have been won on, what's called game theory, that everybody is your enemy. In life, we can either trust everybody, which is naive, or we could actually distrust everybody, which is kind of based on fear and anxiety. And when you live such a world, you look, I asked somebody, how is it that Russia stole a whole bunch of books from the Chabad movement? And it's not like they're not aware. Putin made a museum with these books, but he doesn't allow them to get returned. Like, why not? And she's a very bright woman. She came from Russia. She understands the mentality. She says it's simple. It's just a way of poking people in the eye. See, the bully has a great need of poking other people in the eye because he has been poked. It's a little bit like a comedian once said that he was walking down the street and somebody threw a snowball. And he says, that's not fair. That snowball had ice in it. And he starts complaining. Then they're like, hey, let's get somebody else. Yeah, let's get someone else. So in other words, when we've been hurt, there's a part in us that feels the desire to hurt someone else. When we've been put down, we don't want to be lower than others. We have this need to lower others. So ultimately, this entire foolishness of anti-white and same thing would be if someone's anti-anything, but anti-Israel, anti-West, anti-money, it all comes from people that effectively are miserable bastards. They unfortunately hate themselves, and they're jealous of people that love themselves. And to conclude, Einstein said the Germans couldn't be against the Jews, that the Jews come from a race, because if you just come here to Israel, you'll see Israel's made up of every single race. Jews are a religion that believes in goodness and kindness. He said the Germans were against the inherent good heart within the Jew. And the only way we will make this world a better place is by understanding that this world is a choice. We cannot be naive and think everybody has love in their heart, nor can we be upset and angry and think everybody has hate in their heart. We have to understand that each one of us is a part of his story of history. And if you do your part, you will make the story. You will make history. You will be the light that shines up the universe, because ultimately to God, 1 in a billion is the same number. It's about rising beyond the hate, rising beyond the hurt, and choosing to love, choosing with every fiber of your being that I will be a person that just gives goodness and kindness.